tap water.
Yeah, it has that processed flavor to it.
The Pro Pure G2.0 filtration system removes these deadly substances and many more, leaving only fresh-tasting, deliciously clean water.
Okay, this is very tasty.
It's good water.
Refreshing.
It's good.
Go to InfoWarsStore.com today. Use promo code WATER and save 10% off your Pro Pure purchase. Again, that's InfoWarsStore.com or call 1-888-253-3139.
Welcome back. Now, in the last 24 hours, there's been an amazing development in the story between the link between autism and vaccines. And of course, Dr. Brian Hooker has been trying to get information from the CDC for quite some time. He was successful in talking to a whistleblower inside the organization. And based on those conversations, he published some information that at first was private. They did not say who the person on the inside was. As the establishment pushed back on that, they released the person's name, and just within the last 24 hours, that whistleblower inside the CDC has put out a statement. Now, this article that's up on InfoWars.com today from John Rappaport says CDC whistleblower William Thompson's own statement released from his lawyer's office today, and he said the bottom line is the 2004 CDC study on the MMR vaccine and autism was cooked. It was a fraud, he says. Now, this is what he has from the statement. Here's an excerpt from the statement put out by William Thompson of the CDC. He said, "My name is William Thompson. I'm a senior scientist with the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, where I've worked since 1998. I regret that my co-authors and I omitted statistically significant information in our 2004 article published in the journal Pediatrics. The omitted data suggested that African American males who received the MMR vaccine before the age of 36 months were at increased risk of autism. I want to be absolutely clear," he goes on to say, that he believes that vaccines have saved lives and continue to save lives. But then he says, "My concern has been the decision to omit relevant findings in a particular study for a particular subgroup for a particular vaccine. There have always been recognized risks for vaccination. I believe it's the responsibility of the CDC to properly convey the risks associated with receipt of those vaccines." Now, the interesting thing is, of course, that what we're talking about here is the MMR vaccine. That's measles, mumps, and rubella, which are not generally fatal disease. They have a small risk of, as any disease does. But essentially, they're fevers, they're childhood diseases. They're pretty mild if you get them during childhood. When I was growing up, we were intentionally exposed to those in most families at a young age so that we would build an immunity to it at a young age. Yet now they're giving it vaccines to very, very young children. We've seen an explosion in autism. A lot of researchers like Dr. Brian Hooker, as well as others, have pointed out that they believe there's a correlation between these. And now that we have this in a study that was covered up by the CDC, it is something that a lot of people should be talking about, but no one is talking about. So for more information on this, we want to talk to Sayer Ji. He's a widely recognized researcher, journalist, and author. He's founder of GreenMedInfo.com, the world's most widely referenced, evidence-based natural health resource of its kind. He is a steering committee member of the Global GMO-Free Coalition, an advisory board member of the National Health Federation. Joining us now is Sayer Ji. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ji. Now, I want to talk to you about a couple of different topics. Of course, you've got on your blog right now some information that we referred to earlier about the Ice Bucket campaign that they're running with ALS. And I want to talk to you about some things that people can do to decrease their risk of getting the disease. But I also want to talk to you about the recent vaccine autism information that's coming out about this whistleblower. We now have CNN publishing stories denying that there's an autism link. And as you've got on your blog, the CDC autism vaccine cover-up is extending into the media and into medical journals. So I want to talk about that. But briefly, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about this ALS Ice Bucket situation. As we pointed out in the article that Anthony Gucciardi had, only about 27% of the money that's being donated actually goes to research. Tell us a little bit about the kinds of things that people can do that we already know can help them reduce the risk of the disease.
Well, it's amazing because if you look at the $100 million already raised in just a short period of time, the ALS Association proudly declares that a good 27% will go to research, and even 14% will go to fundraising, which is kind of ironic because the money that's being raised is, being expended in doing so. The problem is that folks don't realize that the ALS Association has as corporate sponsors some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, some of whom benefit from some of the known causes of ALS, which are statin drugs. In fact, 3 of their sponsors manufacture statin drugs. In the medical literature, you see clearly a signal that there are a number of clear causes for ALS that are not being addressed by these cause marketing campaigns, and certainly not the ALS Association. Some of those are as simple as pesticides, tobacco, statin drugs. And then there is a broad range of research that's been funded by taxpayers like you and I that show over 60 different natural interventions, some of them as simple as vitamin B12 therapy. One study, in fact, showed increased survival time for those receiving up to 25 milligrams of a methylcobalamin type of B12. That is not present on the ALS Association's website. It's not present in this viral meme. And it's disturbing because there are people that are suffering, and what they're doing is it's a form of brainwashing. That's why I like to call it ice washing, like pink washing. You just kind of wash away the concept that there is a cause to this, quote, idiopathic condition, throw a fancy Latin name on it or Greek name, and you think, well, there's nothing we can do but raise money. And that's what's going on. So people need to be aware that there is research. On Greenman Info, we've actually made it free to download a huge document showing all of this research, and really getting people to start realizing that they have to take back control of their health and not fall prey to the cause marketing.
And of course, we see always the same things that are being put forth by Big Pharma, very expensive, as well as many times things that are not safe, maybe not effective, and there's also some risks involved to it, more so than these natural remedies. Specifically mention some of the natural remedies besides vitamin B12 that they could take.
Well, one of the things that has been studied extensively is actually cannabis, which is the most politicized, demonized entity on the planet, right? It grows from the earth as a weed for free. Nature, God created it, and yet just possessing it in certain states will put you in jail. So this is one of the biggest threats to the pharmaceutical model, which requires up to $800 million on average per trial to get through phase 1, 2, 3 stages for drug approval. Imagine trying to get a return on your investment for something that grows like a weed out in the backyard. So obviously, and that's recreational and has other benefits that are well documented. So this is one of those blind spots in this association's philosophy, as well as in this ridiculous sort of frenzy over the ice bucket challenge.
Over and over again, we see that story about marijuana, as well as its competition to different things like the cotton growing industry, where it also presents an alternative to some of those established industries. I mean, we've seen it with glaucoma. It's one of the most effective treatments for glaucoma, as well as for the sickness that comes with cancer treatment if you're taking traditional medical cancer treatments. One of the things that you mentioned was the clear conflict of interest with statin drugs and the fact that some of the people who make those drugs are also involved with the ALS. Is there any kind of conflict of interest with another one of these causes that you mentioned, pesticides?
Yeah, there's actually a rather large chemical company that is a funding agent for this association, OxyChem. And they produce a wide range of chemicals, including things like polyvinyl chloride, which is used in PVC, and a broad range of neurotoxic agents. So the conflict of interest is so obvious that if folks don't wake up, then really they're just throwing their money down this toilet-like funnel, which you're seeing with Breast Cancer Awareness Month and every possible monthly way to really just take advantage of folks' charitable instincts.
Let's move on to this other story about the vaccine autism link. Now, this is something that's been developing for a time. We've had some articles from John Rappaport saying that they had a whistleblower that Dr. Brian Hooker had interviewed. First, they had this guy's information out there. They did not identify him. Later, they identified him, trying to get him to come forward. Then everything seemed to come down. And then we've just now, in the last 24 hours, we've had the person who was at the CDC come forward and say, yes, what they did have, their summary of what I had said is accurate. But yet, we've seen a medical journal censor it. We've also seen CNN come out and flatly deny it. Tell us what's going on with this. Kind of summarize that for the audience as to what's going on.
Well, I would say that John Rappaport's description of this as a vaccine gate is not sensationalistic. And what we're seeing is a global, conspicuous silence on the topic of this top level CDC vaccine safety scientist. This is the top of the evidence and authority food chain, arguably in the world, saying that they manipulated, falsified data on the safety of basic vaccines in our immunization schedule that link them to autism, especially in African Americans. So there's a race issue here that's not even being addressed. So what we're basically seeing is the equivalent of the sort of Edward Snowden event in terms of calling into question the very basis for the entire vaccinology sort of vaccine push. And I mean, you look at it, the facts are very clear. Go back to 75, okay? We had 1 in 5,000 diagnosed in this country with autism, and we had 13 vaccines on the schedule. Zoom forward to today, we have 1 in 86 according to the CDC, and we have 3 times as many vaccines in the schedule. And that critical window, when you're blasting these healthy children with vaccines, is when the regressive syndrome of autism occurs, including things like sudden infant death syndrome. So this extends to the even larger topic, which will hopefully come out, which is we have the highest infant mortality rate in the developed world at 36. We have the most vaccines that we're giving our children under age of 5. So, I mean, it's so clearly a larger issue than just one vaccine, maybe raising the risk in Black boys for autism. This is the whole house of cards falling down.
It's been an explosion that we've seen. Certainly in my lifetime, I'd never had heard of autism until I guess maybe about 15 years ago. I started getting to know people whose children had autism. Now it's really exploded. But of course, when I was growing up, we didn't get vaccinated for mumps, measles, and rubella. We just got mumps and measles, and we suffered through it for a couple of days. And of course, that has some risks involved in it, but it's nothing like the risks of having permanent damage from autism for the rest of your life. It seems like that's something that people need to know.
Absolutely, and it's just brain damage, and we know there's plausible mechanisms that we can explain. The MMR causes antibodies to form that then target cell structures in the brain. These are well-characterized events that have been, pretty much in the literature for decades. There's no question that this is what's going on. So even the term autism is, again, like ALS. It's this syndrome where they throw onto something which you could very well just call vaccine-induced brain damage.
One of the things that you mentioned in your article that would be on greenmedinfo.com, CDC autism vaccine cover-up extends to media and journals. You say that autism and autism spectrum disorder itself is not some mysterious genetic epidemic. That's the way they're selling it to people, that this is somehow a genetic epidemic that we're seeing, that's not something that's changed in the way in our environment or the way children are being medically treated?
It's the most oxymoronic term that you could come up with, a genetic epidemic. You'd have to literally drink fluoride to even comprehend what it's supposed to mean. It's environmentally induced exponential increase in brain damage in our children. And yes, vaccines play a critical role in that, but there's also chemical exposures, there's dysbiosis caused through contaminated GMO food with Roundup. There's electromagnetic elements. There's all types of issues here which are multifactorial. So you can't just say vaccines cause autism. That's true without, kind of having a nuanced approach. But you can also not deny that thousands and thousands of parents who watch their child get their first immunizations and show them go into great regression and never recover. And these are the people that are suffering in pain, and they're now vindicated by the CDC's top safety scientist. And this was vetted. His lawyers said that they released this statement. This should be all over the mainstream media. There's not a single mainstream media report on it, including even the CNN report that came out last night about the journal retraction. That's
right. They just push it down. And clearly, as you point out, even though there's multiple causes, we can say, and we always do say, that when there's some kind of a correlation in an epidemiological study between something being present in people's lives and an increased occurrence of particular disease, that is essentially always talked about as a cause-effect relationship when we see a significant enough change in that. So from those standpoints, we really can see that in this data that's now been released in this leak here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And again, that was Sayer Ji with greenmedinfo.com. And as he pointed out, you're not hearing this information from the mainstream media. And so we hope that you will support our operation here. Please consider, if you're not already a subscriber, to get a subscription to Prison Planet TV. One subscription can be shared with up to 11 other people.